Welcome to Around to Product Development, our weekly show where we will, in 55 minutes, feature lively discussions on hot topics in digital product creation. We're going to talk about monetization to innovation, and we covered all in 25 minutes. Fluff, just actionable insights from digital product practitioners at the Agile Product Builders community. And for you to know, the Agile Product Builders community is a Slack community powered by Boulder, digital product creators, and consultants. We're very proud to have it, and if you want to join it, feel free to join, as we are craving more people with an interesting background. This week, our guest is Dawid Żurowski. We're going to talk about when to invest in a design system, and also how to build a design system maybe, and what the cons and the pros are of it. And Dawid is a product designer at Boulder, and as I saw, he has experience in UX, UI design as well. And as I learned very recently, he also has a background in architecture, and I think it's offline architecture, so buildings probably. Dawid, maybe you can introduce yourself briefly and tell me more about the architecture as well.
Exactly. Hi. So yeah, I'm David. And as Matt introduced me, I'm a product designer. So I'm a product designer at Boulder. And that's actually true. I do have a background in architecture. Right now, I'm currently finishing my university degree of architecture. And I have to say, it's quite similar to product design, UX, UI design. It's basically designing so that the end users have a positive experience, and you're constantly working with people, with others that actually help actually implement your ideas into real life.
And maybe before we get started, can I ask you, did you first get into architecture or first product design, or how did that happen?
Now, definitely first architecture. That was my kind of main focus until I realized that I wanted to pivot. So, first of all, was kind of just the aspect of a career that was more future proof, I suppose, that you could actually do online. That actually was connected with digitalization. But also, just I really noticed how much I liked the digital products and creating them. When I noticed that you can actually design products without having to code them, I thought that this will be the career for me. So. Definitely, there was a switch right there, but I'm definitely sticking with product design for now.
So I think the common theme is that you like to see things built basically. So that's constructing things probably only when you do it digitally, it goes a bit faster than when you have to build a physical building most of the time.
Exactly. That's correct.
Yeah, both very cool. So hey, we're here to talk about design systems today. And maybe I'm going to be very honest that I knew what design systems are, just out of general knowledge, but I didn't know in detail how they actually look like and how they work. And I think in that sense, I'm not alone. It's for probably people who are not that familiar with it, a little bit of a black box. So maybe you can take us into what design systems actually are, what they do, how they look like. What do I need to think about when I heard the term design systems?
Of course. So looking at it from a very broad perspective, what is a design system? So just generally very broadly, a design system is basically like a set of principles and schemes that are used that actually define what a product is and how it looks like, how it functions, and what the experience of that product is. But looking very closely at digital products and creating digital products, this is actually a set of certain principles, sort of like guidelines for creating a certain product. In real life, when we're actually developing products, what a design system is for, let's say me, a designer, it is a set of components, elements, things even that actually sometimes would actually fit into a kind of style guide. So this for a designer like me, this tells me how to build a certain feature of a product. Even if I'm a new designer in a certain product, I know what kind of typography to use, what kind of colors to use, and I have ready-made components that are already pre-approved by, let's say, the client, and I can actually use them to build out further on the application. And
Perfect. And
yes.
yeah, sorry, I heard you use the term style guide, and maybe that's a good like hook actually for me. So style guide is probably something that everybody knows, right? Because every business owner, you have a small business owner, right? You go to a designer, you get a logo, you get like a few tips on how to position yourself, right? The document most of the time with pages it says, don't use yellow on this color, please do this and this, only use this logo in this context. So what is the difference between a design system and a style guide?
Yeah, definitely. So a style guide is actually very closely related to, let's say, digital art or print art, printed media. So this generally tells you kind of what the company represents, what are its like general values, and how we actually design for that company, what kind of typography used, maybe what colors, what are the brand colors of that company. And what a design system is, it is more than that. It is more broad and actually looks at more of how the products for that particular company are built. So, a style guide will typically be for an artist that is actually creating something for a company, maybe even for, let's say, creating some advertisement for the company or some catalogs, books for a certain brand. But what a design system does, it kind of encompasses more or less how the digital product should be created. And it's a guide for both designers and developers. So when the designer is creating something, they're using ready-made components, elements that through actually atomic design, they build together to create a larger form.
Perfect. That sounds really interesting. So you said it's for both developers and for designers, right? Do I benefit as a user as well from a design system or is it more for the other side actually?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for the user, this is, I think, most visible because when you go to certain websites, so maybe I'll give some examples of some really good design systems and where's places that actually it functions very well for the end user. This may be, for example, for Apple. Maybe you already have, an iOS device. Maybe you have seen or used a MacBook before. When you look at the Apple ecosystem, all of those products kind of flow together whether you're on, Apple's MacBook or an iPhone or any of their devices, or even on their website, you feel this continuity. There is a constant flow, and you feel like you're still in one place and everything looks and feels familiar to you. When you see a particular feature or maybe an ad, you know right away that, okay, that is Apple. And
Mhm.
certainly with other platforms, with other products, even for example with Shopify, this also creates a flow and consistency that is used throughout the different products that they offer. So it does give great value to users in terms of actually being able to recognize a certain brand and be able to go through one page to another without any kind of confusion. So, a kind of real life example of how it benefits the person that using, for example, a certain particular web app is buttons. So thanks to a design system, the design system, it really kind of strictly defines what elements should be used and how they are used in a certain product. So let's say it defines what a button looks like, how it should look in the hover state in certain different states. And when a user encounters this button for the first time on a particular web app, they're already kind of familiar of what it works like and what they can expect. When they go to different pages of that particular web app, they are still familiar with it. So definitely it really gives a lot of value to both the users, the developers and designers as well, but also to the client most and foremost.
Yeah. So I understand as a user, indeed, and Apple is, I think, a very good example that everyone will understand, right? Because we all, um, even though not everyone loves the company maybe, but we do love the design in general, right? And I think everyone is still delighted by how it looks and how it works. So that's quite a good example. So I see the value as a user, and then as a designer and as a team and as a company and as a developer, is it mainly time saving that what's the design the system brings, or imagine that?
I think that time, like you mentioned, is actually one of the biggest factors. So when we're looking at the pros of using design systems, in the long run, this is one of the most key features. And this is also why we see a great, return on investment of an investment in a design system.
Mhm.
So for the developers, what this looks like is when they are creating a particular web page, if they already have some ready-made components and some elements that are prepared beforehand, and repeated in different parts of the application in the web app, they can actually reuse those elements and quite quickly build quite simple forms of the website. So let's say we have a new feature where we have another product page and there are certain differences. If we already had those components made previously, if we reuse them, it makes the development process much, much quicker. And in general, this also increases the comfort of developing. So you don't have to do the exact same thing again and again. It really limits the kind of repeatedness of certain actions. And for designers, for me, for example, the reason why I love using design systems and the products in which I work with is that I don't have to spend so much time creating labels and buttons and everything, every single element each time I'm creating something. When I go into my product, I can use ready-made components which I made previously and actually focus on the fun part. So actually creating the thing that is unique about that particular feature or page. And if I'm working in a new team, then the onboarding is definitely much, much quicker. I don't have to create learn everything all at once. I can just use those particular elements that will be needed for a particular scope of work that I am focusing on at that time.
And maybe just very practical. And I know it sounds maybe like a stupid question almost, but how should I imagine that the design system looks like? Because I know a style guide, right? It's basically most of the time a PDF, I think, that you would get. Maybe that's too old school still. I think before PDFs, you probably got a document or something. But how does a design system physically look like? Is it also a document? Is it the website I go to? Is it like an internal place where I can go? Like how do I navigate a design system? How does it really look like?
So yeah, at the core of design systems is documentation. This is the kind of the key thing about it, is that at the end of the day, it's basically a document. It's a documentation of
Mhm.
how we should build certain elements of the web page and what the kind of principles are for developing that certain product. So when you're looking at the general documentation, this can actually be some sort of file which details exactly the types of paddings, the typography, colors that are used. But on a day-to-day basis, when we are using it, for example, me or the developers, this is actually a more or less a file in Figma. So Figma is probably something you might already
Mhm.
recognize. It's a very
I
popular
do.
software that you use for designing web apps. And there we actually have our set of components that we use in all of the products for a particular company that we build for. So for example, if we have a unified design system for all the products in a particular company, then we have a file for that design system. And there we have all the documentation regarding, the typography, colors, and all these elements that actually define how we want to approach creating products for that brand. And this also includes all those components that are used in Figma. So that's kind of what it looks like in terms of documentation. And then based off of that, the developers can actually use that to build their library of components.
Yeah, sounds good. And then you mentioned ROI earlier, right? Return on investment from a design system. And we already talked how it saves time for a team, right? It's good for the user because it's consistent. Um, how much does a design system, maybe it's the first question, how long does it take to build a design system? Or how much work is it to set it up first? And then we maybe go to the financial question because I cannot even think if we're talking like weeks, months, years. I think it's hard to say it for in general, but maybe you can give some examples or I have a rough idea about it.
Yeah, definitely. This is actually a pretty tricky question. You might already actually find some numbers online and find some statistics in terms of how long it takes. Some people actually claim that if you use 20% of the designers and the developers' time, you might actually build the product in about 12 months. You might build a design system in 12 months. However, if you use 40% of their time, you might build it in 6 months. So this is kind of a general overview of like how much it takes to build a whole entire design system, let's say
Mhm.
from scratch. However, this question cannot be fully answered super directly. I can't tell you if it takes, let's say, 1 week or 10 years, because it really depends on the product and how you approach it. So in one product, for example, if you're, let's say, a startup, you want to create a new product, you might actually already use an open source library, and use ready-made components to start working with the design system from day one. And you might actually build it iteratively. So let's say I'm already creating this new product and I'm starting in Figma. We might already use a ready-made design system, kind of file, let's say a open library from Material UI. I might already use that and start building my product off of that and just customize those elements, integrating it from the very beginning of the work. And in this case, it doesn't really take much time to actually convert and change, how we work, because we're already starting from scratch, from zero. But in terms of larger companies, let's say existing products that want to switch to a design system because they did not do that beforehand, then this might
Mhm.
definitely take a little longer. So we're looking at,
Yeah.
for example, sometimes even weeks, months. I would say that probably a year would be typically like a maximum in terms of actually implementing more complicated, complex design system. But of course, it depends on how complex the product is and how many pages there are in a certain product or web page.
And if we're saying months or a year, then we of course are talking, right, parts of the time, right? Not a full
Yeah.
year in terms of working hours, but it can take months or a year if you take some of the time of the people who use it basically to allocate their time or get some support doing it.
Exactly. It all depends really on the investment. How many people you have on
Uh,
your team, how many people can work on it, and what kind of time they can allocate towards creating that design system. But I would say if you're creating a new product, then basically you can, count it in from the very beginning that if you already start from something that is pre-made, let's say an open source library, you can greatly save time and you won't even notice that it's taking up time of the developers or the designers.
And then I know that this is also a difficult question, probably maybe impossible to answer, but money is very important. And I know that many companies, they always want to know how much does it cost me, right? And then they want to know how much money I can make from it as well. So that's the other question. But what does it cost to build a design system? Are we talking about $10,000, euro? Are we talking about 1 million, right, euro or dollars? Like what do I have to imagine? I know you will say it can be anything, but maybe just a rough idea.
Yeah, exactly. The way I would answer that question is basically yes and yes. So both options are definitely viable. You might be able to spend no money at all. You might be able to spend 10,000, you might be able to spend 1 million. What I can say very roughly is that typically, if we're starting off, with a new product and you're using those open source libraries, then the costs might not even be noticeable because you're actually saving time from the very beginning. So let's say me as a designer, if I'm joining a team, for me at the very beginning, it might actually take me quite a bit of time to create, certain very basic elements, such as inputs, maybe some form elements to really create, elements that will contribute to this kind of atomic design where we have, atoms, molecules, and forms. And just to kind of build it all together, it might take a lot of time to create that, which is of course an investment of the client. Whereas I've noticed that, even looking at working on products that we've been able to build from the ground up, when we're using ready-made components, this greatly reduced the time I had to spend on designing that particular product. So instead of spending, let's say, 1 month on creating these basics to really create the foundation of the product, I was able to use ready-made components and really focus on the nitty-gritty of what the client was actually expecting. So you actually see those wireframes of products. And looking at kind of the long run, this also contributes to how quickly prototypes can be created, how quickly we can do user testing. So of course, when you're looking at costs, if you are a large organization, if you're a really large company that has existing products and you have, some elements there, so your products have some inconsistencies, different colors, and you want to really unite everything and create one joint design system, you can be certainly looking at costs that are above, from let's say 100,000 to even $1 million or even more. So this of course depends on the complexity. But if you are a startup and you're starting off, then definitely you can count costs on, let's say, more than tens of thousands. Or if you're just starting closely from a open source library and you're not investing in ready-made customized components, then this might actually be, right away a return on investment because you're saving the developers and designers time.
Yeah. So that's good to understand. Benefits, right? That's quite clear. The money, it's kind of like difficult to say in the end. And then I would ask you, are there also downsides of design systems? Or are there reasons why I should not be getting it maybe, or why it's not for me as a company?
Yeah. So I would look at kind of two types of companies that I would say is ideal for. Is first of all, startups that are starting out and they actually are open to using open source libraries. That's kind of the perfect company that is tailored for. But also large corporations or large companies that already have products and have a certain budget in mind to actually invest to scale the product. When looking at scaling a product, it's really important to look at future-proofing it. So, what will it look like in 2 years' time and 5 years' time? And if we stop for a second and actually invest in the design system, this is what will allow us to actually expand our product and build it out more and more. So definitely those types of companies are, really good target points of where design systems are most often visible. Whereas if you look at maybe companies that wouldn't really be exactly tailored for, is let's say a larger company that already has a lot of products, it would take a lot of time and effort to unite it under one design system. However, if they have a very limited budget, and let's say they are more in the maintenance phase and are only planning for scaling, then maybe this will not be the ideal solution for them. Because definitely if you have a larger company and this requires a lot of work, you really have to have the budget to change and actually, step in and change everything into a design system. There's definitely something that takes a lot of time.
Yeah, I can also imagine that maybe the maintenance might take some work as well for a design system, right? Someone has to keep it up, and like with all things, it probably has to be done properly, right?
Yeah, definitely. So in terms of the kind of general lifespan that you might take on average in terms of statistics, typically can have you can see the lifespan of a design system being about 5 years before you need to make some more drastic changes, which are actually very frequently the general result of changes within the company. So let's say changing of the brand colors, maybe there's a strategic change in the business perspective. That's in terms of looking at the lifespan of the product. But looking at overall, the kind of elements that you might see in terms of maintenance, definitely this requires members of the team that are really well trained and have experience in creating such design systems. If you're using an open source library, this might take less expertise. However, if you're creating one that is fully customized, you definitely need somebody that has experience building those type of design systems. When we look at typical, challenges with building them and maintaining design systems, you might actually see some challenges that occur when you have junior designers or junior developers working on such systems. They're definitely not very easy, especially if they're fully customized. So you need to really pick and choose who you want to have on your team when it comes to maintenance. But in terms of costs and what you have to expect, you have to know definitely that if you build the design system, it's going to definitely help you in the long run. However, you have to still maintain it. So you definitely have to change, the components. If there's any kind of decision, you have to go back to it, and somebody always has to kind of have an overlook on the design system. That's definitely something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I still think 5 years is much longer than I expected for changes to be done on average, right? So I thought it's maybe something you have to do each half year or something, but I understand maintenance, of course, but big changes take a bit longer probably. So that's good. Yeah. And then you mentioned Apple earlier, right? Which is a great example, I think, probably of a design system. And I think there's many great examples people find. Are there also like not bad examples, but risks when making a design system or something that can go wrong? Or maybe there's an example that's well known of it, I'm sure. Just out of curiosity.
Now, I wouldn't want to name, any kind of company or any kind of system that actually
let's not.
is a bad example of a design system. But I can generally say is that the kind of two main limitations, as I already mentioned, the expertise of the individuals that are actually building the design system can be something that can be a little bit challenging. So if you put a junior designer and a junior developer to create a design system, it will take much longer than you would have expected, anticipated while estimating a certain product. So definitely this is something to keep in mind. In terms of fallbacks and challenges that often occur, you have to definitely have somebody that has some experience in already designing to know who to put on the team. And the second element that you have to remember is that in terms of maintenance, it's also not just development, but it's also the designer's job to really keep the maintenance up to date in terms of their own files. So the kind of challenges that I've maybe for example, encountered is that when you have all your components in Figma, it's really enticing to just sometimes detach a certain component and make it, custom. Because for this certain form, you want to have a more custom input. You want to change something up. Maybe you're experimenting, and it's very easy to kind of make small little adjustments here, there, everywhere, and you end up with quite a lot of what I would call like design technical debt. So at the end of the day, you might have a design system, but then you still have elements in your design that are no longer according to the system itself. So you have to really go back to the design system and check back with it, and definitely keep an eye out to maintain the consistency.
David, we are almost at the end of our talk because 25 minutes are almost over. Of course, people can come to you if they have a question about design systems. Right? I'm sure they can find you on LinkedIn or through our resources, find you directly. What other places should people go to see good examples or read up? Are there some resources people can go? Do you know 1-2 places that are really interesting?
Yeah, definitely. So when looking at the basics of design systems, there are a lot of different sources. For example, one of my favorites is definitely Figma. They have a whole blog dedicated to different information about design systems and guides for beginners, but also those that are already experienced. And even at Boulder, we have a blog that talks a lot about ROI in terms of the design systems and how to build them, what they look like. So there's definitely some resources that I can recommend, but also actually those open source libraries that already offer those components. I think that Material UI is, for example, one of those best examples, or even Material Design. You can go there, you can look through those components, see what they look like, how they function, and get a really good look at the entire design system from the point of view of what it looks like for the developer as well as the designer. So those are some that I would definitely recommend, but also for those that are on the Slack channel for the Agile Product Builders community, I'll also be sharing some links there. So you can also keep an eye out to see the thread when I post some information there.
Perfect. So thank you so much for sharing to the people where they can find some info. I think that's very useful. And thank you for the talk. We have done or finished the 25 minutes. It was amazing to talk to you. Very interesting from architecture to digital architecture, basically. And I am sure that I learned a lot about design systems, which is a good sign because that means that everyone has probably learned about it. Thank you once more for joining, Dawid, and the people, they can find you as said, well, either on LinkedIn, right, or on the Agile Product Builder Slack if they're interested. And yeah, for the rest of the people who are still listening, I would like to invite you to our next week's event, same time, same day, Monday, 3 p.m. CET, and we will discuss prototyping strategies with our guest, Oskar Kwitek. We will learn how prototyping can save you from product risks and why people misunderstand it many times, actually. So I'm very happy to see all of you there. And David, thank you once more for joining.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.